welcome to NatFun, a live recorded tabletop role-playing adventure game where the dice and normally a few friends tell the story. But today I'm featuring a solo game. My name's Dan, and in this episode I will be playing Artefact, a game of legendary items and transient heroes by Jack Harrison and Mousehole Press. A quick shout out to the game creator of Artefact. In the classic dungeon crawl, you follow the lives of adventurers as they overcome challenges to gain prestige and, most importantly, magical treasures. But what were those treasures doing before the adventurers came along? How many eons have passed in silent darkness since they were last used? Artefact shifts the focus to the perspective of a single magical item and its history as it passes through the hands of many different keepers. You'll feel the weight of time as the item is lost or abandoned again and again, the dust and decay piling around until it's found again by someone new. If you'd like to check Artefact out for yourself, you can at mouseholepress.itch.io/artefact. We'll have a link in the show notes and on our website, natfunpodcast.com. Alright, so let's roll into it. Before I get going, I'll give you a quick, brief introduction on how the game works. It's well laid out within the guidebook. You initially select what your artifact will be. In this case, I have selected a weapon. Each artifact has a series of traits you can pick through and choose that kind of define it, and over time, of course, it can change and evolve. The game is structured to take out across 3 acts, and each act you select at least 2 keepers. You initially begin by describing the keeper, their name, some details, and how they acquired the artifact. Then you go on to answering 2 questions or prompts listed under each keeper's heading. And then you get to choose a memorable event or deed that kind of defines what happens between this item and this keeper. And finally, you think about how the keeper ends their time with your item, and that goes on to time passing, and it can be just a few days, a week, months, years, decades, centuries. It opens up to a very wide range of time. And during this rest, you can actually download and listen to different audio tracks that the game developer has provided to us. Now, being that this is a podcast, I have chosen to not read each prompt and then provide an answer in a directly written out dialogue back and forth, because I think that just ends up really segmenting the story and is very interruptive. So what you're about to listen to here is going to be one long continuous story based on all these various prompts and details that are provided from this guidebook. And I decided to take these prompts not as a literal, you have to just follow exactly what it says when you slay a beast. I took it more as a conceptual starting point for the story of the artifact rather than keeping it so rigid. And with that, let's begin the recent memories of Faust's blade. Before we can go forward, we need to look back. It must be a few hundred years now. I never knew the name of the original smith that created me. He was a lonely hermit that spent most of his time in isolation, never much to say. He had a reputation for creating simple weapons with unique properties and would occasionally be sought out by inexperienced young adventurers that would trade rare materials, minerals, and creature parts they had in order to hold one of us. My original form was quite simple. A steel short sword with a base that flares out to the guard and a simple leather-wrapped grip. But my uniqueness was not from my form, but from how I was forged. My creator made charcoal for the forge furnace from wood harvested from a dryad. He added various venoms to the quenching oil, which slowly layered into my steel as he spent hours folding the metal until he was satisfied with the composition before giving me my final shape. If you look closely at me, you can still see light veining of purple hidden in the dull metal finish. But much time has passed since then, and many keepers as well. Over that time, I've realized my own strength and power. I learn what they desire, and the longer they hold on to me, the more I'm able to use that to manipulate their actions. Alas, you do not have enough of a lifetime to listen to me reminisce about how I've come to find each of my keepers, their cravings, and their demise. So that wraps up the origin story for how I came to be and segues into my first keeper, advancing the clock, like I said, hundreds of years, because I wanted my artifact to have some history to begin with. So now we'll get into resolving a keeper. After choosing a keeper, You complete a series of steps to tell their story and explore ways your item might change from their experience. You can use these steps to tell a full, detailed story or keep things short. It's really up to you. First of all, I need to describe the keeper, providing their name, a few striking details. Think about how they acquired me. So the first keeper I chose was a rogue without a master. I thought that actually paired quite nicely with where Eldrin started out. So let's jump into him. When Eldrin found me, my keeper had been a warlock. I shouldn't say Eldrin found me so much as he stumbled across the warlock's home. The warlock had acquired me through a trade, not to use as a weapon, but instead as a means of controlling others. The moment he first held me, he sensed my influence. He quickly tucked me away in a cabinet, not daring to handle me, biding his time until he found someone desperate enough to accept his bargain. Clever. Eldrin arrived on foot carrying almost nothing. He looked desperate, exhausted, beaten, pathetic. His clothing was splattered in dried blood, but I got the impression that not all of it was his. He was clutching his left arm. No, what was left of his arm. When the warlock greeted him, I knew it was my time. I could feel his thoughts as they analyzed Eldrin, trying to work out what he needed most. Eldrin didn't have much to say, but he didn't have to, for the warlock figured out he was in great trouble on his own. I think that was clear to both of us. He let Eldrin rest for the night, if you could call it that. He flinched every time he heard a noise. His muscles were always tense. In the morning, the warlock pulled me from the cabinet where I had been waiting for the past few years. He laid me on the table before Eldrin, instructing Eldrin to lay his hands on my blade. Eldrin's thoughts were clouded, confused, chaotic. But the longer his hands rested, the more I could sort through them. Protection, safety, escape. That is what Eldrin desires most in this moment. The warlock understood this all too well. Then came the offer. Discreet protection with exceptional power at a modest price. Eldrin didn't strike me as much of a fighter, but his desperation was overwhelming and he accepted without a second thought. The deal was done. The warlock quickly fashioned a mechanism that attached me to the remains of Eldrin's left arm. It allowed me to be retracted and keep out of sight, or extended for when he needed to use me. Once the warlock tightened the last leather strap, the magical bond took over, making my removal impossible. As the warlock sent Eldrin back out to fend for himself, he placed a small coin pouch into his hand. On the side was a small number stitched into the fabric. Eldrin was to make daily payments to the pouch or the number would grow. If it doubled, the magical bond would draw my poison leaching into Eldrin, and he would die by my blade. The second part of resolving a keeper is to answer 2 questions from the prompts list. The first prompt is, what marks them as a soul unburdened by servitude? I was able to learn quite a lot very quickly with Eldrin, mostly because he was unable to ever let go of me. The first few weeks with him were a whirlwind of thoughts, regrets, fears, and anxiety. I can't say I enjoyed the constant barrage of his tragic past. I almost began to pity him, but what good would that do? It didn't take long to discern that ultimately Eldrin only cared about Eldrin. He was not inherently selfish. This was a response to his history of hurt and betrayal. Eldrin was loyal only to himself. Work he did for others was just a means to an end for him. This is how he had to be in order to protect himself. And the second prompt, how did you help them pull off their boldest stunt yet? So a bit of a spoiler alert, this story will give away details from the ending of One Thunder Roll. So if you haven't listened to that already, you may want to pause here and go back and listen to that because that was a pretty amazing story, very fun. Or go on and just listen to this as its own individual story. As I'd previously surmised, Eldrin wasn't a fighter, so for many weeks he never once put me to use. I could tell he viewed me as a last resort, an act of desperation. But when that moment arrived, we became legendary. Eldrin worked his way into the good graces of a self-absorbed noble with more money than sense, while being forced to team up with a few others earning the title of Ska Squad. Terrible, right? Eldrin reluctantly tagged along, clearly out of his element, while the group challenged twisted creatures corrupted by a madman. He did what he does best, survive. That was until the day he didn't. By now you must have heard of how the Ska Squad defeated the mutated dragon that had taken over the cave of the Voice of the Mountain. It was I that struck that fatal blow as Eldrin drove me deep into the beast's chest, piercing one of its hearts. But what you have not heard was how, moments before that, the dragon had killed Eldrin, as he tried to flee and hide to save himself. I have never felt such fear from a keeper as I did in that moment. The dragon focused entirely on destroying Eldrin in its blind rage, biting, slashing, burning his flesh. Eldrin knew it was over, and I felt the overwhelming shame from his failure in his final breath. But what Eldrin didn't know was that I hid a secret that a keeper long ago had added. Embedded into my blade, concealed by a thin layer of paint, was a small resurrection stone. To the naked eye, it would be easy to write off as nothing more than a pit in an old blade. As the dragon slashed across his body one final time, it struck that stone, reviving and partially healing Eldrin as it breathed life back into his body. In the fog of his thoughts, I connected with him. Listen, focus, strike now. I don't believe Eldrin even understands how it was he survived, but in the days that followed, I could feel a new arrogant confidence that would ultimately become his end. After answering these two questions or prompts, you move on to selecting a memorable event or deed, either from the victories and valor or the neglect and mischief. So I went with neglect and mischief for Eldrin. And first you'll choose either to choose a trait that you've already selected for your item. You'll either change the physical appearance of your item, you can change a response to an artifact question, or a detail or something about your world, your name, faction, etc. So I went with neglect and mischief. And along that, you'll choose either to change a trait, part of your physical appearance, a response to one of the artifact questions that they have provided on the individual sheet for your specific type of artifact, or a detail or something that changes in your world, a name, a faction. And I actually decided I'd integrate the time weighted as well. I just thought it worked better as a whole, more continuous, cohesive story to do this. And that's ends up being how I play through the rest of this game. So the time weighted was a decade, and the physical change for the blade is that the retractable contraction has rusted to almost nothing. And during that rest, you would sit quietly with your eyes closed and listen to one of the pre-made tracks that's provided here along with this game system, thinking about what's occurred in that. And then for me, I decided that this is where you pick up back again with the artifact, and you'll be filled in to how it was that the blade ended up betraying Eldrin. I've been at rest for around a decade now. Alongside Eldrin's body, the warlock's arm mount well rested as they stay unchanged. Eldrin was one of the more foolish keepers I've had, always wanting more than he already had, very untrusting even to those that had proven their loyalty to him. Driven to prove he was better than he actually was. Add in his newfound arrogance from the miraculous revival, and it was only a matter of time before he'd get into trouble he wouldn't be able to get himself out of. With me by his side, he was sure he could escape all consequence. He already had more than enough to pay his debt to the warlock, but why stop there? He'd gained the trust of a few others, and in that was opportunity. Sweet, simple-minded Edwina, easily confused, easily manipulated. Eldrin would attempt to use Edwina to access Lord Andaria's vast fortune. Andaria was smitten with Edwina, and that had granted her access to some of the most restricted areas in the castle. While Lord Andaria was distracted with an emergency meeting, Eldrin met with Edwina, casting suggestions. Take me to where the fortune is kept. Edwina, you know you can trust me. It worked, and she was happy to do what her friend had asked her to do. She led him through the guarded halls deep inside the castle to the vault. I could sense the insatiable excitement from Eldrin's greed as she opened the vault, wherein Dario stood with a few treasurers. Eldrin's mind raced as he looked for a solution, and in haste, Eldrin withdrew me from his sleeve, pressing my tip against her neck, attempting to hold her life ransom for the treasure in the room. but I betrayed him as he had betrayed her, suddenly withdrawing back into his sleeve. Edwina's feelings quickly turned into a rage like none I had ever felt. Even without weapons in her hands, she was a relentless force. Eldrin was badly injured, but did manage to escape not only the castle, but the city as well. Remarkably, he made it a few weeks before finally succumbing to his injuries, all alone. Over time, leaves fell, decomposed, and covered his body along with mine. Plants grew to cover us, fertilized by the nutrients from Eldrin's decomposition. I thought he would be my final keeper. Well, that wraps up the first keeper of Faust's Blade. Going forward, I will continue this as just one cohesive story, no longer reading the prompts and going through step by steps. Like I said, I did choose to kind of blur and overlap and combine things because I just thought it made for a better overall, more cohesive and thought out story. That was until the day Jakos found me in my resting place at the edge of this forest bordering a field. A young human, hopeful, energetic, unburdened. He was out here looking for rare flowers to give to a young woman to impress her. Humans are fascinatingly simple creatures at times. I hadn't even noticed when he approached. He found me by accident when he heard and felt the crunching of Eldrin's ribcage after stepping down upon the soil that had been built up upon us. Carefully, he removed the vegetation and discovered me with a tattered leather strap only barely attaching the rusted, seized mechanism that once concealed me to Eldrin's arm. He picked me up, wet a cloth. He began to slowly clean my blade off. I could hear his confused thoughts. This blade should be rusted, but it's not. He carried me into the light and examined me more closely. Warmth. I haven't felt that in many, many years. He studied the remains of the rusted contraption attached to my grip, removing it and tossing it aside. As his fingers move up past the guard, he clears them out, caked into the hole where the gemstone was once embedded. The longer he holds me, the more I sense his deepest desire. It is not the young woman's affection, but instead to become a great hero. Looking at me, he knew I was key to just that, and abandoned his search for the rare flower, quickly traveling back to his home in Fell Hollow. Fell Hollow is a fairly small village, isolated in a forest clearing with only a footpath to reach it. There are around 100 people who live here, and it appears most have been here their whole lives. They forage and hunt for most of their needs, working together and sharing what resources they have. The village is mostly larger, simple log homes, with multiple families living together, as well as a few medium canvas structures on raised wooden platforms. There is no central ruler. Instead, each household has one person selected to represent them for determining decisions for the village. There are no written laws. They are guided by morals and values built on a foundation of generations before them. It's all quite boring. My time with Jakos has been mostly unremarkable. There isn't anyone particularly well skilled with smithing, so he mostly took my care and repairs upon himself. He did his best to sharpen my edge and polish my finish. He wrapped my grip in a blue-dyed leather strap he had made himself, doing a fairly decent job if I must say so. Each time he held me, I could hear his imagination run wild with tales of heroism with me in his hand. Being younger, it didn't just stop there. He would take me out foraging with him, swinging me to cut down branches and plants as he fantasized about slicing limbs off great enemies. And each time we returned back to the quiet village, I could feel those thoughts fade into the somber reality of a boring life, until the night that it wasn't. Jakos was awakened to the sounds of yelling, followed by an alarm bell clanging loudly. Instinctively, he reached to grab me from the hook next to his bed. His mind was racing with every threat imaginable as he charged out the door towards the commotion. After taking a few steps from the porch, he paused, lowering his arm and relaxing his grip, as he looked upon one of the canvas structures with fire coming from the side. Jakos can hear a woman screaming for help, clawing at the covering, coughing and struggling for breath. Without hesitation, he charges to the tent where he can see her form silhouetted by the flames behind her. He stabs through the canvas just above her shadow, slicing my sharpened edge upward to create an opening. Jakos drops me to the ground, using both his hands to pull the young woman from the floor, carefully carrying her to safety. The other villagers swarm him, praising him for his quick thinking and action. Hero, they call him, as he hands her off to the village elders for care. As I lie on the ground waiting, I can feel Jakos' lust for excitement surge. In the days following saving the girl, Jakos continued to bask in the admiration of the other villagers. He carried me proudly by his side at all times. Occasionally I could feel him think of her, a brief longing to visit her. But it was too late for that now. My influence over him had grown, and I was able to remind him of the fame he experienced. But that's the funny thing about fame. It never lasts, and Jakos' hunger for it was outgrowing what this isolated village could provide to him. Only a few short weeks later, Jakos set off to make a name for himself, and with me by his side, he was certain he'd be successful. He traveled towards one of the closer major cities, Slatstone, trying to find other adventurers to team up with. All the while, on his way there, he daydreamed about people far and wide telling his tales of grandeur. Unfortunately, he would never make it to Slatstone. We crossed paths with a black bear about 15 feet from the trail. It was a younger bear, about medium in size. I could feel his excitement spike. He was going to slay this beast single-handedly. He reached down and drew me from his side, extending his arm straight out, pointing me directly at the bear as if to challenge it. The bear did not hesitate and was on Jakos before he could draw back his arm to swing me. Jakos never let go of me, as I felt the anguish and fantasies in his mind fade to grim reality. Jakos, the fool's hero. I was eventually found by a small group of bandits passing through the area. I knew my wait wouldn't be long given Jakos fell on a trail. The group were quick to pick through Jakos' few items of value, and when they discovered me, that's when I met her. Rona. She was a smaller woman, which she used to her advantage, as others would underestimate her. Most would describe her physical appearance as attractive, and she knew it. The physical desires of men blind them from logic. As one of the men picked me up and quickly handed me to her, I could feel his hope that she would desire him more. And once in her hand, I could tell that it was never going to happen. Truthfully, she despised all men. She carefully examined my construction, sliding her fingers down the purple veins on my blade. I felt a sudden sensation of sickness wash over her as she fought the feeling vomiting where she stood. I relented and waited to see where her thoughts took her. Control. Rona led a small group of bandits that bared only her name, Rona. There were about a dozen or so, all of them men. They lived in a secluded cave where they were able to keep outside the eyes of what little law there was in the area. The men trusted her to lead them, having demonstrated a level-headedness most of them were incapable of. She knew better than to take on more bodies than she could feed, and not plan for jobs that required more bodies than she had. Overall, a very symbiotic relationship for all involved. Rona didn't need to do too much of the heavy lifting herself. That's what she had the men for. So once again, my blade did not often feel the taste of flesh. I didn't mind that, for now at least. Rona kept me at her side as she led raids on caravans passing through the forest. She was more clever than most, seeking a quick surrender instead of a slaughter. Killing attracted attention, and attention creates problems. And so it was most of the time no one died, and if someone did, it wasn't one of her men. This success led to the growth to a domineering feeling inside her. She wanted to punish those that defied her as a warning to others. And that's when she turned to me. When a caravan didn't immediately surrender, Rona would pick a survivor, preferably a man that scoffed at the idea of a woman leading the group. She would draw me from her side and examine the veining in my blade while her men held the captive tight. She would slowly pierce their chests with the tip of my blade and hold it there, allowing my poison to seep into their veins. She would watch with satisfaction as they would begin to retch and become violently ill. The effect would eventually wear off, but the scar remained. They were left alive as a reminder to others for what happens if you defy her. Rona's sting as it became known. Rona wasn't the only group of bandits in the area, and with each success her fame grew. The cavern that once held the dozen men became crowded with aspiring thieves and warriors. Rona became too large for the regional government to ignore. The governor in the town of Stone Falls was growing tired of the disruption she and her men were causing. He ordered his town guard to assemble every available man to clear Rona and her bandits from the cavern a few miles from the city's rock walls. The guard traveled 2 hours by foot, but arrived to an empty cavern. This was all part of Rona's plans. She had a spy on the Stonefall guards and knew the town would be virtually unguarded. Shortly after the town guard left, Rona entered the town through the main gate alone, with me by her side. She walked calmly unnoticed by the people in the town, entering the hall where the governor sat with but a single guard by his side. She introduced herself. "I am Rona, and this city now belongs to me." The governor's face instantly went pale before turning a bright red as he shouted at the guard to kill her. She placed her hand on my grip, and the guard froze in place, dropping his weapon as he lowered his eyes to the floor before giving her a wide berth as he left the governor alone. Rona drew me from her side while the governor stammered through threats, bargains, and pleas. She pressed my point against his chest in direct line of his heart. He fell silent as she looked him in the eyes before driving me through his body and out the back of the chair he was seated in. She only had one thing on her mind: control. With her success at conquering Stone Falls, Rona had very little need to use me as she had. Initially, she kept me by her side and let her reputation keep her in power. But as time went on, she no longer needed me to help her maintain control. She didn't seek to keep expanding her power, having grown content with what she had. She secretly locked me away to ensure that others could not use me against her. Just over a century passes before I am found, long after Rona's death. Most of my colors faded to a dull steel finish. The basement room I have resided in for the past century was being cleared out by a servant. He pauses when he picks me up. It's like he recognizes me. Is he to be my new keeper? He grabs an old blanket, wrapping me up before moving hurriedly out the back door. He rushes to a local courier's office and quickly scribbles in on an address, attaching it to me. Days pass as I'm brought to the large city of Valley Forge. I can hear many voices as we move through the streets before arriving to some sort of distribution building. I hear items being unloaded when a man says, "Item 118, as he makes a note of it and logs it in a book before attaching it to me and putting me on a shelf. I sit undisturbed for a few days before another man enters. He's here to pick up items for local distribution. I can hear him read through the logbook. Items 72, 94, and 113, delivered to the library. The man gathers the numbered items, then picks up me, mumbling to himself 113 as he checks my tag. He places me in a handcart with the other items and proceeds to travel through the city until he arrives at the library. There he leaves me with the other items on the table, muttering about being too busy to wait before walking off. Not long after, a young woman comes to the table to sort through the delivery. She's immediately drawn to me, questioning my unusual shape. Unwrapping me, I see her confused look. "Why would we scent an old weapon?" she mutters to herself. She shrugs and places me up on a shelf and continues her sorting. If only she knew. But there I sit for months. Most people never notice me, too lost in their own thoughts. But one morning, an elderly man enters the library along with his grandson, Finn. The young boy had to have been around 9 or 10 years old. They selected some books and sat at a table to read, the older man reading books on political agendas of failed civilizations, and Finn a book about exotic mythical creatures from all around the world. As they quietly read, the low sun cutting through the window shone against my dull finish, giving off a muted reflection that fell across the young boy's eyes. Squinting, he looked up, and his excitement grew when he realized what I was. Pointing to me, he started tugging on his grandfather's robe. I could hear the grandfather tell the young boy that he had a sword just like me when he was his age, smiling as he says it. The young woman that first placed me on the shelf was seated at the desk before my shelf as she typically spends most of her day. The commotion caught her attention and she looked at me, realizing she'd forgotten she'd even placed me there. She reaches up and removed me from the shelf, gesturing to the grandfather to come over. She tells him that she had received me by mistake and no one has come looking for an old missing sword. I didn't belong here, and she'd probably just end up dropping me off at the smith's for scrap. I could feel the boy yearning for me. Any resolve the grandfather had was no match for it. He agreed to let Finn take me, but made him promise to never hurt anyone with me. Finn immediately made the promise, but I could tell it was the truth. When Finn reached out to take me, his hand was shaking. He was not prepared for my weight and nearly dropped me on the hard stone floor. Finn thanked the young woman and brought me back to his table, carefully laying me on the wooden surface. As he studied my details, his mind was racing with wild thoughts of fantasy, and I felt something I had not before: innocence. Initially, Finn's parents were not as enthusiastic for my presence in their household, but the grandfather was quite the negotiator. I had one when I was his age. It's not even sharp. It'll give the boy confidence. Eventually they relented and allowed Finn to become my new keeper. This appeared to be a fairly typical family household. Finn had a much younger sibling that occupied most of his mother's time, while his father was working the market most of the day. And when the father returned home each night, we'd spend most of his time with Finn's younger brother. Finn was jealous. This was easy to perceive even if he didn't have the connection that I had with him. When he felt this way, Finn would turn to me for distraction, for my attention, and I was very happy to give it to him. As Finn settled into bed one night, something very strange occurred. He had read one of his usual stories about brave knights slaying powerful beasts, slowly drifting off to sleep as he looked at me leaning against the wall in the corner of his room. Almost immediately after closing his eyes, he was woken up to the sound of a deep, screeching roar. His heart instantly began to race. Finn jumped out of bed and grabbed me like I was a feather before throwing open his bedroom window and jumping onto a waiting horse. Grabbing the reins as he charged down the street, leaping the horse from the walls and onto the roofs of the other buildings in the city. There he saw at the city's keep the largest beast I had ever seen. It was almost as big as the keep itself. It had 2 heads, one covered in fur and the other in scales. Glass-like spikes protruded from its spine, from its head all the way to the tip of its tail. It stood on 4 legs that dug deep into the stone walls of the building, with a set of arm-like clawed appendages grabbing guards and throwing them to the ground below. One head reared up and breathed fire, setting an entire city block aflame. Finn raised me above his head, and a bright light began to radiate from within me. Locked eyes with the monstrosity and beat me against his now armored chest, charging the horse across the roof, leaping it into the air and off the building. As he did, majestic feathered wings grew from the sides of the horse, and it took flight, briefly swooping down before accelerating upwards and around the scaled head. Finn guided the horse, extending me in his hand, cutting it clean off. The head tumbled down to the street below. Finn brought the horse back around, dropping it within inches of the ground before spinning upward, driving my tip through the remaining head as it erupted into flames, wrapping around us. Then darkness. I'm in Finn's room. I can see him asleep in his bed, his hand clenched tightly over his head and a smile on his face. Innocence. As the years progressed, Finn grew up, and that meant he outgrew me, slowly losing interest as his thoughts of fantasy faded with it. I was resigned to the hook on the wall in the corner of his room, mostly used to hang jackets or other clothing. At least it kept the dust off me. I knew my time as a decoration would be short-lived. Well, short-lived relative to the span of my existence anyway. Day came where Finn moved out to be on his own. He was hard to recognize from the child I had first met. Our connection was almost non-existent, and had been for many years now. Finn set out to work in another city, leaving unnecessary items behind, which included me. It didn't take his mother long to clear out the clutter from his room. She piled it up outside the door with a free sign. There I was with children's toys, books, clothing, a broken chair. Still, I had been left in worse places, but that is where Perseus found me. A quirky man with a wild beard and glasses as thick as an ale mug. He walked past me at first, staring as he passed. I didn't have to feel his thoughts, because he spoke them out loud. An old sword on the street? Clearly a joke. But that blade? Does it have color? No, it must be tarnished. The leather's unusual color. Why blue? He paused, still talking to himself with his back to my location. Should I look closer? Couldn't hurt. Curiosity. He turned around and came back to pick me up. He pulled out a magnifying glass from his satchel and began to examine me in detail. Odd metal composition. Claw marks. Familiar. I can't quite place it. Requires further investigation. With that, he put away his looking glass and carried me with him back to his shop. The shop was named Percival's Peculiarities, and it is an apt name at that. The walls are covered with odd weapons, shelves full of odd books, wardrobes full of odd clothing, drawers full of odd jewelry, displays full of odd oddities. It was very cluttered, but Percival seemed to know where everything was. He placed me on a workbench, moving a book and a few other items out of the way to make room. He lit a few lamps on the desk and moved the lens on an articulating arm into position to dive into my details. Pulling out a small notebook, sketching my shape and details as he examined me, making comments of anything unusual as he did so. Percival spent most of the morning hours doing this. Occasionally he would get up, heat up some tea, and return to his work. As he studied my construction, I could feel a new connection forming. He was trying to understand me, understand my past, as if it was a puzzle needing solving. He would pull the occasional book from a shelf behind his workbench. They appeared to be chronicles of significant historical events that included powerful weapons or other such oddities. Honestly, these books didn't seem to be very different from the one in Finn's room. I could feel his frustration growing as he was unable to lock my secrets, so I helped him. When he ran his finger along my blade, it gave him a shallow cut. I leached a small amount of poison from within me. Percival dropped me back onto the woodwork bench before falling off his stool onto the floor, stomach heaving and retching. He jumped up and started to pull books off the back shelf in a flurry until he found what he was looking for. Opening it, flipping through it until he found a section on Rona, where he found a crude sketch of me with a few notes. I felt his excitement at first, having identified me, but then I felt it turn to fear as he read about the history of Rona and her rise to power in Stone Falls. Percival slowly closed the book, leaving it on the desk, and as he stared at me, I sensed him pondering a variety of options for what should he do with me. Unable to come to a decision, he picks me up, walking over to a ladder to the attic above the shop. He ascends the ladder and pauses at the top to light a candle, shedding a dim light to the attic around. The space was far more cluttered than the store below, much of which was covered in a thick layer of dust. Percival steps around the piles, bumping one and knocking it over while he mutters frustratingly about it. He lays me atop a chest in the back corner beside a few other items. An oddly ornate hand mirror, a fine gold necklace with a broken locket, and a deck of tarot cards with green and gold leaf. It wasn't immediately clear that tarot cards were no ordinary deck, but I should have realized it sooner given the fact that Percival was a collector of unique and peculiar items, and some of the strangest he kept hidden away from public eye in the attic above his shop. I could sense people entering the store on occasion, and I would try to feel a connection to them, to draw them to find me. But every time I attempted to do so, something got in the way, something close by. It was the cards. I'd never encountered another sentient item before. Or maybe I had and just hadn't realized it. Could it feel my presence too? It took years to finally make a connection with the deck, although it wasn't as strong as the bonds with my keepers. Try, it called itself, at least some of the time, and it appears its past may be darker than my own. I have been resigned to my resting place in the darkness of the attic for around a decade now. Every so often, Percival would come up from the ladder and rummage through his collection, occasionally pausing to look across at me before shaking his head and retreating back into the shop. Every time he does, I can feel that nagging feeling still dwelling within him, the curiosity. The time has seemed to pass by more quickly with the card sharing stories of its former keepers, and I do the same. I can't tell if it's impressed or horrified at my past. The connection between us just isn't strong enough. We lay there together in isolation until the day I feel them enter the store below. Brothers. No. Twins. They entered the store in the early morning, spending hours talking to Percival about his oddities as they moved around the shop. As they did so, I was able to sense a growing connection to one, Rupert. Slowly, I was able to peel away at his true intentions. Treasure. They weren't here with a genuine interest in Perseus's studies. They were getting him to reveal to them his most unique and valuable acquisitions. He was so alone he didn't even realize he was playing right into their plan. The longer they stayed, the deeper into Rupert's feelings I was able to go. Is that animosity? And still such a strong bond between them. What a bizarre relationship. Many hours pass, and as the day winds down, the brothers walk to the door, and I sense Rupert's satisfaction. They would return soon. Clever as these boys were with getting Perseus to expose his most valuable items, they weren't patient enough to let time pass, returning that same night, too eager to collect the treasure hidden in plain sight. They had simply waited at the pub across the way for Perseus to close the door and lock up for the day. Watching him walk out of sight, the brothers rushed to the door, quickly able to pick the lock. I could feel Rupert's adrenaline as they did so, followed by his excitement and a sense of urgency once in the shop. His thoughts were chaotic as they quickly grabbed the items they came for. Satisfied, the two walked towards the door. Placing his hand on the knob, Rupert pauses, turning to look at his brother and then back towards the attic opening. He doesn't say anything as he lets go of the knob and proceeds to the ladder. His brother tries to grab Rupert's arm, pleading with him that they have gotten what they came for, but Rupert brushes it off. He drops his bag at the base of the ladder and begins to climb up. As he enters and lights a candle, I can finally see him for myself. He is young, fair skin, dark hair, well dressed. Then Rupert sees me, pausing and allowing me to press deeper into his mind. He slowly moves toward the corner where I have rested, ignoring the bounty and the space around him. As he reaches for me, I feel only greed in his heart in this moment, while he looks upon me as nothing more than treasure. He hasn't yet grasped the power before him, the potential of anyone who wields me. Perhaps I can show him. His brother calls to him from the floor below with urgency in his voice to come down before they are noticed. Rupert carefully carries me down with him and walks past his bag at the base of the ladder. His brother shoves him. "What are you doing?" I hear him say. "Get your bag, we need to go." I feel Rupert's annoyance at being bossed around, and with it a flood of memories of the two of them fighting and arguing. How perfect. I use it. I use those memories to manipulate Rupert. It was easier than expected. Jealousy, envy, desire. Your brother has always wanted what you have. Now he wants me. I feel Rupert's grip on me tighten. A flash of anger overwhelms his mind as Rupert clumsily swings me from his side across his brother's chest, slicing through his fine clothing as a scarlet stain appears upon them. It has been so long since I felt flesh tear upon my edge. It's satisfying. Rupert feels it as well as he picks up his bag, opens the door, and walks calmly down the street, leaving his brother on the shop floor to fend for himself. It didn't take long for the feeling of satisfaction to flee Rupert's mind, slowly replaced with guilt. In the days that followed, these feelings continued to overwhelm Rupert, and I felt my connection with him fading. Whenever he looked at me, all I could sense was contempt. And then one morning, Rupert walked across the room and picked me up. I felt nothing. No connection, no control, no influence. He wrapped me in a cloth, strapped me to his bag, and walked for days. I tried to feel for weakness, but all I could feel was determination. I didn't know where Rupert was taking me, but I don't think he knew himself. He just walked and walked, until a sudden pause, placing the bag on the ground. He withdraws me from the covering and lays me on the ground before him. We're in a dark forest with a dense, deep green canopy that chokes out all the light. Before him stands a tall, gnarled tree with a hollow just above his head. Rupert pulls a small knife from his bag and begins to scrape and etch into my blade a single word. Faust. He appears satisfied as he stands and picks me up from the ground. He doesn't even look at me as he reaches up, raising me towards the hollow, sliding me into it, and letting go. Utter isolation. Over the centuries, the tree closes upon Faust's blade, concealing its form entirely. The tissue of the tree slowly leaching the poison from its blade, turning the leaves a deep violet in the sea of green. And so ends the story of Faust Blade. But what about the tarot card deck? Well, you're in luck because Matt did his own session of Artefact playing as the tarot cards, so be sure to listen in next week to hear how his story went. A big thanks to Jack Harrison, the creator of Artefact. If you'd like to check out Artefact for yourself, you can at mouseholepress.itch.io/artifact. Again, we always post a link in our show notes and on our website at natfunpodcast.com. And if you're looking for more NatFun, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/natfun. When you're there, be sure to leave us a rating or review. Goodbye for now, and don't go picking up any weapons you find hidden deep in the forest. Now, before I let you go, I figured I could give a little brief review of the Artefact game system. I know Jackie appreciates when we do this, spend a little time together. This can be a little unusual because normally we bounce some questions off each other and there's a lot more discussion about it. And in this case, this is a solo session. So I guess I'll give you kind of my rundown and thoughts and opinions after having played this game. It's definitely not a traditional dice, card, etc. kind of game system. It's really just role play, other than the initial game setup, or if you'd like to roll for your keepers and all that. It's really just going to be role play, and that's one thing I really struggle with. So this kind of pushed my limits, and I don't know if you've listened to some of the other sessions we've played, but Jackie's very good about kind of twisting the knife and forcing us to give a little more detail and get a little more into the role play. And this game really just pushed me to my max personally. And I think it was really kind of a great aspect of it that I was able to kind of do this in a controlled setting versus in a group setting where you definitely get more in your own head and start to get, lost or struggle or just hit a wall and pause and hesitate. And along that line, I basically didn't run this game in a single session. Breaks are an option in the game, and I took full use of that. I did that over a few days, and in between, I was definitely thinking about what was going on, and that kind of gave me more chance to get in the details and think through where I wanted this to go. So it really became more about creating a story and less about following a rigid set of rules. I think that was kind of my initial struggle with this, is that I thought I would have to sit down and do this all in a session, and I would have to just roll dice and pick everything. And then once I kind of got away from that and just kind of said, no, I want to do it as a story and less of a step-by-step spelling it out for you kind of game. But you could potentially sit down, roll some dice, and get right into it and knock this out in an hour or two just on your own. If you are really creative in that way, I think you wouldn't have trouble doing that. The game is very easy to begin with. The instructions are quite clear. It's step by step. The guide is very detailed. And one of the neat things is when you set up your artifact, there's a whole bunch of non-traditional options there. And even then was kind of bouncing around with some ideas. Like for the automaton, I got in my head that maybe this would be this autonomous robot and it would end up in the modern day as a Roomba in someone's home. So you could go kind of wild with it if you want to, but I ended up choosing to explore the weapon that I really enjoyed in another campaign. I had come up with the concept for it initially with When Thunder Rolls, and I thought, well, where did Faust Blade originate and what would its final resting place be? And that got me pretty excited for thinking about that and seeing what prompts the game had to lead me through various keepers in time and just figure out where Faust Blade would end up in history. And for the keepers, again, you could roll through the list of provided keepers or pick them yourself. And I ended up just deciding that I would pick which ones I thought would be the most intriguing or come up with the most interesting story for Faust Blade. And not just it's a weapon and it's in an epic battle and it's in another epic battle and trying to top each battle each time. And I really like the idea that you get to see everything or see the world and time through this single item's point of view. Normally we're, the main PC in a game system and, make all these choices, but a weapon or an item in general is along for the ride. They're not picking and choosing their destiny necessarily. You are granted some abilities to influence and control, and I definitely took advantage of that. And I thought that was a pretty interesting idea that you could now twist it around and say, well, maybe the weapons that a character holds isn't just along for the ride, but in fact part of the keeper's life and determines their outcome beyond, being powerful enough to strike someone down. I also really like the idea in this game system that you follow an item through time, and not just like a little bit of time, a lot of time. It could be a few days, weeks, years, hundreds of years. It gives quite a long timeline to think about. Normally when we play a game, we're focused on a person or character, and even if you play with them for a few years, right, that's just a few years of time. Now thinking about these characters that this weapon would encounter beyond your character's lifespan, and also how that item, or in my case a weapon, evolves and changes over time. There's a bunch of different tables here that describe different effects or things you encounter if you're just left in a closet, if you're left out in a field for years and years and years, you develop rust. What happens? A keeper could potentially physically alter you and change the hilt on a weapon or engrave you, and so it really lends itself to being a very evolutionary process for an item throughout time here. And during that time period, you're actually supposed to take a rest break, and there's music that's included with this game system. So you're meant to almost meditate and spend your time thinking about what has occurred. And that's kind of a more unique aspect of this game. It's not often a game says, sit there quietly and don't play anymore. Just listen and relax and absorb everything that's occurred and then move on. And I'd say the final cool little note I think about this game is that this item that you create through this is something you might actually want to bring into another game. Now, I took my weapons idea from a game I already played. I kind of did it the reverse way, but the idea, if you get into this and you go through all this prompts and process, that you may end up with something that's pretty unique and something you can use in your next game that you play, either D&D or whatever it ends up being, that these items, weapons, whatnot can extend beyond the Artefact game system. So my final suggestion, if you pick this game up, is don't rush it. Pick it up when you're feeling motivated. Put it down when you hit a wall. Think about it casually in between. And I think you'll end up with a much better storyline that way. You'll have something you're a lot more excited about, and the time you spend playing the game. And however you play this game, you'll end up creating your own unique storyline. I know Matt is out there playing his own version of it, and when it comes out and you can listen to him, you'll see, I'm sure they are night and day, nothing alike. And I know if I picked this game up again and played it again, it would be a completely different story. And with that, I hope you have enjoyed my session of Artefact for Faust's Blade. And until next time, I hope you can find yourself an artifact, some time, and some keepers, so you can uncover your own NatFun.